Good afternoon everyone, and thank you very much for attending our second webinar in this series. I know your time is valuable, so I hope you get a lot out of this today. My name is Danny McShane. I'm the Business Development Director for Tellemachus, and I help businesses solve problems using technology. For a while now, GDPR has been the topic on everyone's mind. This series of webinars is designed to help organisations prepare for GDPR, and we're very fortunate to be joined by a great speaker today. A spot of housekeeping first. I've muted all attendees, but if anyone has any questions, please type them into the text box and I will be putting the questions to Gary at the end. This is the second webinar of the series, so for those of you that haven't seen the first, we've made that available online. If anyone would like the link, send it to them. My contact details will be available at the end. Just get in touch and let me know. We've also included the slide pack as a handout today for you to download as a PDF. Within the slide pack, on the last slide, are the links to all of the webinars to register for the upcoming ones and to view the recorded webinars. That last webinar was a review of what GDPR is, where it came from, how it will affect businesses. This is really the first of 5 webinars that will focus on how to comply with GDPR. Our guest speaker today is someone who's been highly active in cybersecurity for many years, and he'll be able to quantify exactly how businesses can change to live with their data under GDPR. But briefly, before I bring in Gary to introduce himself properly, let me just quickly recap on what we went over in the first webinar.
There are lots of aspects that need to be considered when looking at GDPR, and these cover people, processes and technology. So this is something that should be assessed at a level with authority over all 3. So that usually is board level. Technology is available to assist with all aspects of data protection and data loss prevention. The question organisations will have to answer is, as a business that chooses to store data electronically, should you adopt new technologies to help you secure your data? And we went through the 5 essential steps in preparing for GDPR. Most importantly, if you haven't already, get started now. May 2018 is fast approaching. This is the biggest shake-up to data protection in 20 years. Second was create a data loss response plan. And that'll be the main topic of the webinar Gary will deliver in a moment. And every Thursday for the next 4 weeks, we'll be hosting a GDPR webinar looking at the other essential steps. So please join us again for those. The details, the links on how to register will be available at the end and in the slide pack if you download it. But for now, please let me hand you over to Gary Hibbard.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Danny. That's much appreciated. Welcome everybody to this this webinar. It's a genuine pleasure to be asked to speak about GDPR because there is a lot to do, and over the next 20-25 minutes or so, we're going to focus on one particular aspect. We are going to be looking very closely at data loss response planning. You already know why you need to be taking action, so I'm not going to spend any time on that area. So we are going to dive straight into some of the detail. One of the things that I'd like to do before I do that, of course, is introduce myself to you. So I'm the Managing Director of Agency, and we are a cybersecurity organisation, and we are very much focused on helping organisations understand information security, data protection, cyber security, whatever you want to call it. It's all about the essential protection of data and information that you hold. So we help you do all that through information security management frameworks such as ISO 27001, which you may have come across. But in particular, at this moment in time, lots of people are very focused on GDPR, and rightly so. So I'm doing lots of talks about this particular topic. I'm a member of a number of boards who are, again, helping organizations understand information security and data protection as well. So I'm not going to go into anything further than that. My email address will be circulated and provided should you wish to have that and to use it. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask at the end. But that's all I'm going to say about me at this point in time. We'll get into the detail of the presentation. So, just one second. So, reporting a breach. This is where we're going to start with this, and it's important to really focus on this at the very outset because, of course, we're talking about a data response plan, and you need to know what it is that you're responding to. Now, my presentations normally consist of just pictures, and I talk around them, but I think it's important that on GDPR you see verbatim what the requirements are, and we will explore some of that requirement in a little bit more detail to principally dispel some of the myths that are coming up about GDPR. So when reporting a breach, it's important to remember that the controller shall, without undue delay and where feasible, not later than 72 hours after having become aware of it, notify the personal data breach to the supervisory authority competent in accordance with Article 55, unless the personal breach is unlikely to result in a risk to the rights and freedoms of natural persons. And that's from Article 33 of the regulation. Now, one of the questions that I often get is, well, how do I know, how am I going to find out in 72 hours what the level of breach is, and what do I have to wait? Should I wait until I have all the information? Well, the key words are there, without undue delay. So if you are aware that you've had a breach, if someone's lost a laptop, that's clearly a breach. If you're saying that you need to find out what's on that laptop, that may take you several days to find out what your exposure is. That's fine, but without undue delay, you should be informing the ICO that you've actually had a data breach with as much information as you can possibly find at that time within 72 hours. So that's the first and most important point around this is make sure that you have a process, and we'll come on to that a little bit later on what that process actually looks like. But you need to be able to notify the supervisory authority, and in this case that would be the Information Commissioner's Office within the UK. Obviously every country has its own authority, and you'll have to find out what that authority is within your own region if this is if you're outside of the UK. The other point on here is just to focus on the word controller. Now, you're probably aware, or you should be aware, that under the regulation there are two particular aspects. There is the data controller, and then there is the data processor. Under GDPR, you can be one or the other, or you can be both. So you need to understand what you are. Is the data yours? i.e., do you set the controls and the parameters of how that data will be collected and stored and ultimately erased? If you are, then that is your data, and you are therefore the data controller. If you are a processor, it means simply that information is provided to you by someone else in large quantities, and it is your job to store it and hold it in a manner according to the regulations that is in a secure manner. But it's important to note that whilst it talks about the controller shall without undue delay, the onus is still on the processor to let the controller know that a data breach has occurred. So if you are a internet service provider or a data hosting company, then that processor, that company, that cloud provider needs to make sure that they have a process in place to ensure that the controller is aware of the actual breach itself. Now, I recognize that there's going to be a number of you on here who are have an IT background, and I would simply say to you that the focus for yourselves at this point is to go and review your contracts with your data processors, your hosting companies, to find out what they would do in the event of a breach. So they need to have a good data response plan in place as well. So we'll move on then into really understanding what is a data breach. So we're talking about here about developing a plan. Well, to what? To what end? What is the actual breach itself? So again, under Article 4, Recital 12, a breach of security leading to the accidental or unlawful destruction, loss, alteration, unauthorized disclosure of, or access to personal data transmitted, stored, or otherwise processed. Now, clearly, there's a lot to that, so this can cover many things. For example, it would be considered a breach if in the event of a loss of a stolen or portable device, such as a laptop, a smartphone, or even a USB drive. A breach would be an unauthorized access to systems, including hacking or insider access. So if someone from another department, such as someone from operations, was able to gain access to the HR system or to the finance system, that could be considered a breach. Of course, malware infecting on computers that contain sensitive information would absolutely be something that you would need to consider as being a breach. And of course, we've seen over recent days about this issue of the malware, the WannaCry virus. So that absolutely would be considered a breach, and you would need to inform the ICO. Accidental exposure of records by a worker, for example, publicly posting a database containing payroll data, or even not even accidental, but deliberately putting that information out there. Some of you may be aware that back in 2015, a disgruntled employee who working for Morrison's placed onto the internet all the payroll details for Morrison's. That caused obviously much distress and harm to those individuals, and they had to change bank details and update their records. That would be considered a very serious data breach. And of course, this isn't all about technology. This is also information in all its forms. So the reckless disposal of printed materials or loss of those materials also would certainly constitute a data breach. So the list is long and it is varied, but a data breach clearly covers more than information stored on your computer or a digital device. So we do need to think about having a plan, and as I said, that's really what today is all about. So we're going to create a data response plan. My first question around this is, do you know what you have? So in the first step, the very practical steps that you need to be taking is you need to know what you hold. You can't protect what you don't know, and that's something that we say repeatedly within our presentations and online courses and such. You need to ask yourself, where are your data stores? What servers are there? What software systems are you using? Do you use a CRM, an ERP, or a HR system? You know, what's your finance system look like? Then you need to ask yourself, where do these stores physically reside? Where are they in the world? What is their physical location? So my advice to you listening to this now is that hopefully you've got a piece of paper in front of you and you're already starting to write this down. Many organizations say to me, well, where do I start? And my response to that is start with a blank piece of paper and a pen. What is your organizational structure? What is your layout of your business? And then peel back the layer. What systems do those people use? Where is the data that sits? Next, you need to understand what these stores contain. So now you understand your organization, you understand what systems those different functions use. You can then say, well, what information sits inside of those systems? So what sits inside HR? What kind of data are you holding? The HR data store, it'll contain personal information such as your date of births, your addresses, national insurance numbers, next of kin, possibly even sickness and health records, which may even tip this over into not just personal information, but sensitive information. Certainly the payroll will contain your salary and bank account details, and accounting systems will hold your financial records of clients and other sensitive information. You need to get into that habit of understanding what the impact would be on the individual if you were to lose this data, and you can only do that by understanding what data you are actually holding. As I said at the outset, you genuinely can't protect what you don't understand, and you can't respond effectively unless you've assessed the impacts on those data subjects. So again, in that respect, a slight aside to what we're doing here, which is building your data response plan, you need to also be thinking, what do I actually do in terms of risk? How do I manage the risks associated to this? So if you have a risk register, you should be considering the risk to the individuals of the loss of data that you actually hold. So we are now going to actually build your incident response plan. So to minimize the overall effects of the breach itself, it's, as always, you know, it's so important to plan ahead. This really does come into play around good old business continuity. Whilst GDPR is yet to come into force, I often say to people, there is nothing really new here. All that the GDPR is expecting you to do is protect data that you hold. And what it's asking you to do is, in the event of something bad happening, you have a plan and you know what you would do. And that's what this is all about. An incident response plan, a data response plan, is about thinking about the incident and understanding what your organization will do once it happens. And that's what today is about. So if you already have a good crisis management plan, a business continuity plan, a DR plan, whatever you want to call it, then this shouldn't be difficult. But if you've not started down that path, then again, as Danny said right at the outset, you need to start today. So when a breach occurs, there's, of course, potentially a number of people you will need to involve. So you need to know who they're going to be. So you need to build a team. You need to create your incident management team. And one of the things I often say to people is, if you haven't got a plan already, then start with the people that you would need. And you decide who you're going to be on your incident response team. If you already have a team in place, then make sure that the person responsible for compliance is included, as often they're the ones who are missed off. In the good old, bad old days of business continuity, where we focus heavily on floods and fires and such, the person who was in charge of compliance often was left behind until much later. Now, that person's role is right up front, almost front and center, and certainly front and center when it becomes a part of the data response plan. So it could be your data protection officer, if you have one, but whoever it is needs to be informed at the earliest opportunity that a breach has occurred. Notice that I'm talking about the earliest opportunity, echoing some of those words that we heard right at the outset. Without undue delay, the ICO will need to be informed that a breach has occurred. So it's better to make sure that that person is fully aware that in the event of a data breach, and they need to know what a data breach is, and I'm sure they do if they're a data protection officer, that they will be pulled into a meeting and their focus is to look at the data, the impact upon individuals and personal information. So you'll need to ensure that this person understands how they will inform the ICO once a breach occurs as well. So not just that it is their role to do so, but they need to know how to do it. Of course, it is dependent upon the nature of the breach, so they may not need to. And some of the circumstances where they may not need to is, for instance, if encryption is being used. Now, I will pause there for a second, and that is that under the regulation, it talks about having risk mitigation technologies and processes, of which encryption is one of them. Encryption is not mandatory under GDPR. However, if the information that has that is subject to the data breach, if it is encrypted, the regulation itself states that it may not be necessary to inform the ICO. Keyword, it may not be necessary, but you would have to make that assessment yourselves. So encryption is great, but the key thing here is that someone makes that assessment. So thinking about the plan itself, we need to think about what actually goes into the plan. And this again is relatively simple from the point of view of a data response plan. The plan should contain key information such as how to notify the ICO, a decision on whether to notify your customers, and how to record details in your own breach log. Now I pause and I say this very slowly. How to record details in your own breach log. Have you got a breach log? This simply means a little bit like a health and safety accident log, that you would need to keep a record of any breaches that occur. Whether you decide to inform the ICO or the customers that are affected or not, you need to keep this little accident book. And I do genuinely draw the parallels between health and safety and a data breach log. You can have an Excel spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be anything, any massive system that you're going to go out and spend thousands on. It's a spreadsheet that says, this happened, this was the impact, this is what we did about it when it occurred, and these are the actions that are coming out of this. Something as very simple as that, but you have to make a decision on whether to notify the ICO and the customers, and you need to know how to notify them. So within your plan that you are writing up today or into the near future, you need to have those details on how to do that. The plan itself, in the plan, or the ICO will want to know several things. They'll of course want to know your name and contact details, of course. They'll want to know the date and time of the breach, or at least an estimate. So as soon as you become aware of this, you need to tell them when you became aware of it. And you also need to know, roughly when it actually happened. So sometime last week, one of our employees took a confidential waste bin, and we found out that they'd thrown it in a normal bin, and we're worried that this might have caused a significant breach. And you need to tell them as much about that breach as possible. So you need to be quite specific. So it would be, this potentially has exposed 500 people or 5,000 people, and this is the kind of data it concerns. So it's their payroll details, it's their bank account details, it's their home email address, etc. So that's the kind of level of detail that the ICO expects to know from you. In terms of what the ICO needs to know, you also should be this email address at the bottom, or not email address, this URL that I'm placing here at the bottom here. You should be recording this information here, because this is where you're going to tell them what they need to know. And what I would say to you is this. I said it at the outset, which is that in terms of when you should inform them, clearly under Article 33 it says that you should let them know at the earliest opportunity without undue delay. You can give them partial information, which is one of the reasons why you provide your name and contact details. So you can say, look, this is as much as we know right now, and we are investigating, and we will come back to you, and we will give you a fuller explanation of what has happened and what we're doing about it. And what I would say is that the ICO is going to be looking more favorable upon you if you do that than simply saying, well, we'll hang around for 2 or 3 weeks while we'll do a full investigation, and we go and get some digital forensics guys in, and we'll go and look at what could potentially have happened and what can we do to fix it so that we can go to ICO with a very positive message. Please don't let that bureaucracy creep into your plan. The earliest opportunity to respond to this is absolutely paramount, as it is to inform the data subjects as well. So again, good old business continuity kicks in here. You can have a readied templated letter or email that is sat to one side, and essentially it just has these headings, and at the time of the incident you can assess the parts that you need to include upon your response. But essentially you need to first of all say what's happened. So explain, dear customer, it has come to our attention that 2 weeks ago a member of staff who hadn't fully been trained took a bag full of our confidential documents and has put those in an unsecure location, and we feel that it is necessary to inform you that this breach has occurred. We became aware of this last week. We are now informing you as quickly as possible. What has been compromised is your bank account details, your national insurance number, your date of birth, and whatever information has been compromised. Your letter could then just simply say, and our recommendation would be to you to do the following. Please check your bank account carefully over the next 6 months, or please contact us if you have any more concerns. You would then talk to them about what you're doing now, so what actions. So we have now trained that person, or that person has now been dismissed, or we are now going through a full review of that process. What the next steps are, we will contact you again in 6 weeks' time, or you may contact us, or we're setting up a helpline. Depending upon the size and the scale of this incident, that's down to you to determine. And of course, the final thing is who they can contact if they have any concerns or issues. And that would typically be your data protection officer or your head of compliance. So you need to be able to demonstrate to the ICO that these are the actions that you're taking. Because the ICO is going to ask that question: what have you done? What have you done in terms of the data subjects? How have you informed them? And if you can provide them or present to the ICO this full email, letter, or so on and so forth, then that's all to the good. In terms of how you respond to the data subjects is up to you. So again, you have to determine this when the disaster occurs, or your incident occurs, your data breach. And that would be what's reasonable. So if you compromise just 5 people's confidential data and information, it is not unreasonable to expect you to pick up the phone and go through this and then send them an email. If this were 5,000 people, it would not be reasonable to expect you to do that. But it would be reasonable for you to send them an email and then follow that up with a letter. So you have to decide what is reasonable to you. The ICO will very much, again, look at that, and they will determine what they think is reasonable. You can't just simply press send on a 5,000 email and think that's it, all done. You need to think, well, okay, it may be out of those 5,000, only 2,000 people are going to open those emails. So we need to make sure that they are aware of what's going on. So at your cost, you will then have to determine what the next steps actually are. The final part of this really is about testing this. Like all good crisis management and business continuity in DR, you are creating a data response plan or a data breach response plan. And in so doing, you are setting out certain actions that you will take. So if you just simply took that URL that I showed you earlier and put that into a plan without clicking on the link and just taking a look and seeing where it takes you, or if you don't periodically check that, then how do you know that this is going to work? So you also need to test the plan, because like all good things around crisis management and business continuity, you need to know that everybody understands their responsibilities. Does everyone know what a breach is? So you heard me give you a description earlier about what constitutes a breach. You may need to give that have that same conversation with your internal teams and explain to them that this is not just about technology. This is not just about someone losing a laptop or someone being hacked or having malware on your systems. This could be, of course, someone losing a laptop, but it could be someone quite easily losing a paper file, an arch lever file that they've left on a train, or confidential waste, as I've said, as my example, being thrown into a landfill. So you need to test. Testing isn't just getting the management team into the boardroom and playing a tabletop exercise. It's about testing people's understanding of what breaches are, and testing the team's understanding of their roles in those situations. So the person who is responsible for contacting the ICO, do they know what they need to provide? Have you written that down into the plan? Are you comfortable with that level of detail? Does your PR crisis team or your communications team know what kind of input they would have upon a data breach response? Don't leave it to chance. Don't just document it and think that's the end game. Like many of these things, testing is absolutely paramount. So in summary, and allowing a few moments for questions, this is essentially what you need to do. Do you know what you have? Do you understand what you need to protect? Create your incident management team. Make sure you have a plan that the ICO, what the ICO needs to know and what the data subjects need to know, and make sure that you test and test and test again. Make sure it becomes part of your testing life cycle, and in that way, in so doing, you're going to be able to recover far better. If you want more details around cybersecurity, there's lots to it, as we all know, but just again, clearly you can see at the bottom there, incident management is a big part of this. Establishing an incident response and disaster recovery capability, produce and test incident management plans. Your data loss recovery plan is no different from that. So don't feel you have to create something separate. You can incorporate it. And if someone says, do you have a data breach response plan or a data loss response plan, then you can point them to your incident management plan and say, yes, it's integrated into everything that we do. That's how serious we take these things. And that's my presentation finished with. So I'll hand back to Danny, if I may, and thank you for your attention. And I hope that was helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gary. We appreciate your time and coming and sharing your expertise with us. I'll open up the floor. If anyone would like to ask any questions, if you can type them into the text box. Obviously, our contact details are there. You can contact us after the fact. But does anyone have any questions at the moment? Just while I'm waiting for those to come through, that was the second webinar in our series, and I think you could see a lot of the information that's going to be required in producing this plan is going to need some further work. As I touched on in the first webinar, there are technologies available, and the webinar next Thursday is run in partnership with a company called Spirion, who are data location and classification specialists. So if you're available, we'd love to see you then. And then the other dates are available on the screen. Each one of those is a hyperlink. If you download the handout, you can register for the webinar direct from the PDF. I haven't had any questions through yet. I'll give it another couple of seconds. As I say, our contact details are in that handout. If you think of anything afterwards, please get in touch with us. We'd be happy to help. But for now, can I say thank you very much to Gary for joining us. Thank you very much for you all for attending, and have a good day.